Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Cedric Michael Simmons, and I am the Director of Equity at Greece Central School District. And I am so excited to be able to answer a very important key question that Mrs. Hodgson asked me to answer. And that question essentially is, what does an upstander for equity look like? What does it look like to be an upstander in a period where folks are essentially coming at diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so, in order to answer this question, I prepared some slides and prepared some resources, and I'll share those things with you. But I also asked one of my good friends to be on this call, be on this recording, and give some tips and give some advice throughout it. And that is my good friend, Mrs. Mary Callahan.
Hello, everybody. I've met you already, but I'm excited to be here again, just to provide any further insights or thoughts.
Awesome. Okay. So we know that we are in an era where people are used to 2 minute or less videos. So we're going to go through this as quickly as we can, as efficiently as we can, without sacrificing quality. So, what does an upstander look like? So, when we say an upstander, we think of that classic visual where if you see bullying or you see some type of harm occurring, then a bystander, somebody who observes it, who sees it, but doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything. And an upstander is somebody who, once they observe a bullying situation, or you could say broadly an inequity, they take it upon themselves. They take on the responsibility to not only say something, but to do something in an effort to reduce the harm that is taking place. So, when we say, what does it mean to be an upstander for equity? Part of, or a big part of what that means is, what does it look like to intervene when we see inequities occur? And how do we do it in a way that can actually reduce harm as opposed to doing something that doesn't really change anything or trying to be an upstander and actually making things worse? And as we give our answers, there's a few things we want you to keep in mind. First is that me and Mrs. Callahan are kind of grumpy. I'm not going to say kind of grumpy. We're really grumpy. We are really grumpy because, as the Thanos snap alludes to, shout out to those of you who have seen the Avengers and know what that refers to. But right now, we're kind of in a period that's similar to the end of Avengers Infinity War, where you have Thanos who decided to wipe out half the population, and you have all these people just start disappearing. That's kind of what it's like for DEI right now. There's been a Thanos snap for DEI where we see offices and different departments related to DEI essentially being eliminated overnight. We see positions being dropped. We are seeing statements be rewritten, positions be rewritten. We're seeing in just a short amount of time the retrenchment or the amount of the breadth, really, of essentially the stripping away of the progress for DEI. We're seeing that happen in a very short amount of time. And unfortunately, we are in a place as professionals where we love working together. And a few weeks ago, we were preparing to work together full time as an equity department, as equity professionals. And so we're kind of grumpy because, for reasons that are outside of our control, um, Mary and I will not be working full time together as equity professionals. We're going to find ways to continue to be upstanders for equity in the roles or capacities that we'll be in, wherever that looks like. But at least the vision that we had and the approach that we took some time to develop, unfortunately, that is not going to be occurring this year. And I should say, despite some of the monumental efforts of not only people who are part of our equity committee and our equity team, but also despite the efforts of folks who are in our district who are administrative positions who advocated for these positions to be created, advocated for Greece to take a stand, to be a district that is an upstander for equity, and for reasons even outside of their control, we're in this situation. So we like to be real with people. So we wanted to be real with you. The second reason why, or second thing you should keep in mind, I should say, is that we're both educators. We love teaching. We're passionate about teaching. We are both facilitators of equity committees. Mary has been the co-facilitator of an equity committee that has still been rolling for we're getting close to we're borderline getting close to a decade of equity committee, equity teams at her high school, continuously meeting and remixing and remodeling to be responsive to the needs on the ground. So we are both passionate about doing that. And my job as an equity director, I think one of the most important jobs is to help people be facilitators of equity teams. Last two things, we informal and informal ways we serve as equity coaches. So we listen, learn, and help people grow with them to basically essentially be an upstander for equity. And lastly, the thing that we have the most fun doing and take the most, I think, joy doing is working with students who want to be servant leaders. And servant leaders are essentially people who want to use their skills and resources and assets to not only get their goals met or get the goals of the organization met, but to use their skills, resources, and talents to improve the well-being of other people and to address the practical needs of other people on their team. And we have tons of students who believe in that approach to leadership, and we love to take the lessons that we've learned and the information we have about what they may be up against, pass that information on so that they don't repeat some of the same mistakes or fall into some of the same traps that we have fallen into as we try to be servant leaders more and more. So, is there anything you'd like to add, Mary, about any of those things to keep in mind, or anything else you think they should keep in mind as they listen to what we got to say?
Um, just that I was actually speaking with them the day before the cuts happened. So it's kind of I have to just want to say like I think I shared that day both the sort of the best and the worst of doing this work, and that even when things are hard, we always find a way to move forward, and so that doesn't change just because we've experienced the most recent sort of blow. I guess I'll just say that.
Yes. Well, thank you. In terms of why this question is important, there's four main reasons that come to mind. One is that students, we often say that students who are doing the wrong thing, and I know I've been hearing folks say this about Black folks in particular since I was a kid, that like kids, people need role models, people who are perhaps not doing the right thing, or people who are trying to do the right thing but don't necessarily know how. They need role models. And in my job as the equity director, and along with amazing teachers like Mary, part of our imperative and part of our hope is that teachers and administrators see that they are also role models too, and to be mindful of what type of scripts for how to behave and act, to be mindful of the fact that they are modeling a script. It's a matter of which type of scripts for how to act do they actually want to model. And from our perspective, there are students who care about diversity, equity, inclusion. There are students who care about progress on those issues, who care about servant leadership. And we have the blessing and the opportunity to serve as role models for students who we want to be upstanders. So we're keeping in mind that the answers that we share are not only applicable to you all, but these are also lessons that we share with students. And these were lessons that we planned on sharing, and planned on I guess disseminating through our work with student leadership clubs at least in our previous vision for how to work together. So these answers are with students in mind. Secondly, the outcomes that relate to academic achievement and behavioral achievement, part of our core belief is that the reason why we still see disproportionate outcomes and we still see outcomes that we don't want to see is because we do not have as many people being upstanders for equity as we should. If we increase the amount of upstanders for equity, especially in the ways that we're talking about, then we should expect to see an increase in the outcomes that we want to increase and a decrease in the outcomes that we want to decrease. Thirdly, for Mary and I, for Ms. Callahan and I, this is our self care. The way that we navigate the distance and the disconnect between the world that we think our kids deserve and the actual world that exists, where we manage that distance, is we find ways to intervene to close that distance, even if it's by a few inches. So our self care, the way that we take care of ourselves and deal with the cognitive dissonance of that disconnect between what the world should be and what it actually is we try to do things to close that gap so that we can look in the mirror and say that we weren't bystanders. And lastly, we know that there's a huge tendency for diversity, equity, and inclusion to be window dressing, to be lip service. And what a lot of folks don't understand, but perhaps should, is that the more that diversity, equity, inclusion ends up being lip service and window dressing, the less likely we are to sustain DEI work. So, put differently, when we allow lip service and window dressing for equity to occur, we are actually, perhaps unintentionally, helping the anti equity movement be successful. So, one last main reason why this is important is Mary and I have found that, and I know I found this for a really long time now, it's hard for people to let go of the diversity training gospel. So, what do we mean by that? What we mean is that when the question is, what does it look like to be an upstander? So many people think the way that you be an upstander is to advocate for everybody in your organization, in your school, in your college to go through mandatory anti bias training. And that the way to be an upstander, so the way to be an upstander is to advocate for the mandatory training to exist and then to advocate for it to be for everyone to go through it. And if that happens, then we would see a decrease in inequities. And I have called it a gospel in some ways because it is good news. But it's almost fantastical news. It's almost like believing that diversity training has a supernatural power that we sort of that it has the ability to transform people who don't want to do something into people who want to do something. And it's almost like people think that diversity training is like Ozempic, that if we just have people do their monthly or annual shot or dosage of a diversity training, that it's going to be the antidote for harmful inequities or harmful behavior. And it's not true. It's not true. And the data is so clear on this. And so what we find is that whenever we share this with folks, it ends up being deflating for people because a diversity training or an educational workshop or something was life changing for them. And so they just really want other people to have that experience. And so when I knock on the door and say, hey, that's not going to work, I'm almost like the Grinch who stole Christmas, or I'm coming in and saying Santa Claus doesn't exist. And so it's deflating because people believe that folks will come through a diversity training and say, I was colorblind and now I see racism and I want to do something about it. And then we come in and say, actually, that's not true. So they don't know what tools are available. And so our job is to provide some alternative pathways to be upstanders after we end up, unfortunately, sometimes deflating people. And as a side note, I tell people all the time, if diversity training worked as the Ozempic for racism and harmful behaviors or whatever, then the book White Fragility would not exist. The whole premise of the book White Fragility is that the author is a diversity trainer who's trying to figure out why is it not working. And white fragility is the concept that references it not that references it not working and people freaking out, and her trying to explain why is it that it didn't work. So if diversity training worked in the way that people think it does, then there wouldn't be a basis, there wouldn't be a reason for the book White Fragility to exist. So there are three answers that we have, and then I'm going to have Ms. Callahan chime in on too. The first answer for how to be an upstander for equity is that you have to learn how to be a culture responsive teacher. And when we say culture responsive teacher, we want to be very explicit and say we are both huge fans of Zaretta Hammond. I affectionately call her Auntie Z now because I've leaned so much into her work, and I have so much admiration and appreciation of the work that she's produced and the work that she does with districts. And Mary and I both benefited so much from being able to spend time learning with Miss Retta Hammond when she came to Greece Central. So shout out to Greece for paying for her to come. I can say she definitely, her work and her vision has changed my life. So learn how to be a culture responsive teacher. Secondly, learn how to apply those skills of a culture responsive teacher to adults, and we'll say specifically to adults who don't already agree with you. Learn how to apply the skills of a culture responsive teacher to adults who do not already agree with you. And then the third answer is to find your people to use the equity dilemma protocol. And we will go into what that is in a second. And just remember, these three answers are also very similar to the answers that we would give to high school students who say, I am upset about the injustices in the world. What do I do? And the answers that we're giving now are the answers we would give, and it would be our responsibility to build their capacity to do those things. And we put that outright and share that with you outright because there's no reason for us to what's we're looking for. There's no reason for us to second guess this. These answers that we're sharing, in some ways, and I don't want to speak for you, Mary, so please feel free to disagree. In some ways, it would have been nice if we had these answers 15 years ago or when I was a student and when Mary was a student, because it could have helped us to navigate some of the barriers to equity and some of the traps that we have encountered. Mary, is that fair to say that our path towards equity would have been easier if we had these answers some time ago?
Yes, I absolutely agree. That even when I think back to really, well, I mean, trying to do this work fully. I mean, I remember starting as a new teacher, interested in doing work like this, but I didn't even know what it was called. I didn't know what it. I didn't know what it. Didn't know where to start, and it
Yeah,
took a while to even find that. Um, but it has always come back down to what do I need to do that I have the most control over is myself. So like
yeah,
how do I have to live this way? The way that's true to my values.
yes,
And second, and especially in in like instructional values, right? Um but yes, if I had, and then thinking about how do we move collectively, or with how do we find that, how do we build capacity, because we also learned pretty early on that like you're not getting very far by yourself.
that's right.
It's good for you to do that, but then you also have to find that way to find your community, and then
Absolutely.
actually have something tangible like the protocol to help you actually see the change that you want it to be, instead of spinning your wheels.
Yes.
And in terms of the training, it's interesting because we do hear people say a lot, like people will be at the training and they'll say, "Oh, so and so should be here and so and so
Mhm.
should be here." And it really is first about like how much, because this is a lifelong, it's lifelong learning to be culture responsive educator. It's just always evolving. So how am I continually asking myself about that? And utilizing trainings like that for my own learning and practice because I'm interested and want to do better.
Yes.
Um, so there's a place for them, but we've come at it that in that sort of way, in that way of like it's this magic pill.
Yes. Great clarification in that, and with the training, it's we're not saying the training doesn't have a place to that point. We're saying that the place or we ask it to do more than it can. And so a training is very helpful for making sure that we're on the same page or getting to close to the same page about the language that we're using, expectations, to put our values out there for a district or for an organization. But it is not meant to be a transformative experience where people go from being anti equity to being pro equity. Like that's just
Mhm,
not, that's asking the train to do more than it ever could. And if it
mhm.
was capable of doing that, then therapy would take a lot less sessions. And that's one on one.
Mhm. It's also a good place to find your people.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Absolutely. And find out who are not your people sometimes too.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I thought you were my people, but oh. So, answer number one: learn how to be a culture responsive teacher. The definition of culture responsive teaching that we use when we talk about it in Greece Central School District, and I should say Mary's a facilitator, one of the facilitators of the CRE, or if you want to call it CRT, culture responsive teaching. She's one of the folks who helps facilitate the 4-day training that we offer to students, or sorry, to teachers. So, what does it look like? Using Zaretta Hammond's definition, it's recognizing learners' cultural displays of meaning making, not only seeing those displays but responding positively, and then responding with teaching moves to with scaffolds to connect pre-existing knowledge to new learning, all the while you're promoting effective information processing, creating a positive relationship and social emotional connection with students from a variety of backgrounds, and using that connection to create a safe space for learning. And I added in parentheses and for errors. So if you take her definition of culture responsive teaching and turn it into bullet points, then what that allows you to do is to say, am I able to demonstrate this skill? Am I able to demonstrate the skill of recognizing the cultural displays of meaning making? Do I have the skill to be able to respond to it positively, even if it makes us cringe? And this is the big one that a lot of people struggle with, even teachers that we work with, is what does it look like to promote effective information processing? It sounds very technical and it sounds really important, but it's not something that is a part of our common language of here's this is the goal, what do we do to get that goal? It's just not part of our common language. And so especially for new teachers, if you're going into a building, we believe that one of the most important things you could do to be an upstander for equity is to learn how to demonstrate these skills in your classroom. And the premise is that part of the reason why we still see the academic achievement gap is that our students, whether it be students with disability, our English language learners, our students of color, uh, all of our student subgroups that are more likely to struggle in school, what we anticipate is that if you looked at the teaching and the pedagogy that they were offered, we should expect to see that all of those subgroups, all those students who are struggling are not receiving a culture responsive education. The students who are doing well tend to receive a culture responsive education. So if we see an increase in the amount of people who are providing culture responsive teaching, culture responsive education to all of our groups of students, then we should expect to see some of the inequities that are tied to pedagogy to go away, and then therefore to see some of the outcomes we want to go up to actually go up. Anything you want to add to that or contextualize with that, Mary?
No, that's you got it.
Perfect. Answer two is learn how to apply the lessons of culture responsive teaching to adults that you want to bring into the network. And when I say the network, I mean that population of people who are working to be upstanders for equity. So, as Mary said, we hear all the time when people go to an anti-bias training or a pro or a equity training or CRE training, they'll say those people need those other people need to be in this training like we were. And then when we go to conferences, a common question we hear from people is, "This is all great for us to learn, but what about the people who are not in the room?" Our argument is that we have some very good answers about how to bring other people who are not in the room into the fold. And those answers actually come from culture responsive teaching in the brain. So if you take all the things that we just listed from culture responsive teaching and learn how to not only apply that to students, but then apply to adults who do not already agree with you, then you are being an upstander for equity, especially if it's people who are in your social network, even if they don't identify as upstanders for equity. Concrete example, if you have an uncle, an aunt, a parent who is anti equity, if you learn how to be a culture responsive teacher to them, you are more likely to change their beliefs and change their behavior than sending them to even a week-long training that me and Mrs. Callahan does. So,
I would.
yep,
Could I add one thing there? Just that
absolutely.
um, when we oh shoot, I just lost my thought.
It's okay.
Um, when one of the things that has happened, I think why people want to advocate for people to go to the training is because if you have learned something, like there's a sense of like, well, if people just knew what was really happening, they'd want to do something about it. And it
Mhm.
seems so obvious and so logical to somebody who learns something and grows from it and wants to like contribute to the change. But what we learn is that that's not, it doesn't necessarily work that way, which is why what you're just talking about in terms of how we work with adults and not going into it with, well, you should think this because it's the right way to
Mhm.
think. It's actually, what do you think? Where are you coming from? Like really being, because a big piece of being culturally responsive is actually really listening intently to understand what's going on in order to know how to move forward. And those conversations and the interactions that we have with our peers, our colleagues, can make much more of a difference than saying, go learn this and then you'll change,
Yeah,
because we're actually working with those people instead.
absolutely. Yes. So like the concept of organizing is it's beginning with the premise that we have to engage the people who do not already agree with us and figure out how do we persuade them, how do we convince them to be a part of this campaign or be a part of this movement for equity. And as from an organizer standpoint, let's say you're trying to get people to sign up to join a union. If you go in to go meet with somebody who is not pro union, who's anti union, even, and go in as a know it all who's just like, how do you not already know this? You're an adult, you should already know these things. Then they're probably not going to pay much attention to your pro union talking points. If you go in with the energy of a hall monitor, then you're probably not going to be that successful. But if you take the skills of a coach responsive teacher, to Miss Callahan's point, which begins with like listening and learning to figure out what is their cultural toolkit for making sense of the world and solving problems. If you don't go in with a deep and legit sense of inquiry, meaning going in to genuinely understand what's going on here, how they're making sense of the world, and do not assume that they're irrational and you're rational, but assume that there's some rationality to it that makes sense to them. And my task is to figure out what is it about their environment and what is it about their social world that makes being anti-equity rational to them or reasonable to them. If you go in with that almost like an ethnographer standpoint, then that's one of the bases of being of applying culture responsive teaching to adults to be a good organizer. And this we find that this is really hard for people because people say things and believe things like you should already know these things, what have you. And then I have to come in sometimes and remind people that remember you just did this training and you didn't know these things 2 weeks ago. So like, let's get a grip, all right? Let's have some humility, and recognize that sometimes it's a defense mechanism to go learn something and then want to preach the gospel about how other people need to learn these things because they should have known better. Like, really, that's a defense mechanism for you navigating the tension between what you learned and the fact that you caused harm in the past, possibly. And so like you're trying to do something to resolve it, but it's doing something by focusing on other people as opposed to doing something that's focusing on your own behavior. So what does it look like? So it means taking, like I said, taking all those aspects of a coach responsive teacher and combining that with the skills of an organizer who is trying to expand the population of people who are supportive of the campaign, because the power and sustainability of a movement or of a campaign depends on numbers. So when people say, what about those people who are not in the room? That's an important question. It's a necessary question. And actually beginning with that question and answering it with the skills of a coach responsive teacher is something that we don't see a lot of folks take on that responsibility to do, but we think that it's actually vital to do that. So that includes also things like um, uh, uh, good organizers know that if you want somebody to do something or to believe in something or support a campaign, you shouldn't just highlight the benefits that might exist for other people. You show how their interests are served by this campaign success. You wouldn't go to somebody and say you should vote for Trump or vote for Kamala because it would be beneficial for these people you have no connection to. You talk about how would that person benefit from the election of a Trump or of Obama if you're campaigning for those campaigns. Similarly, part of what we have to do is use the skills of a coach responsive teacher to show how other people benefit from the progress that could be made if equity work was successful. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mary, especially about like your own experiences of me pushing you to do that too?
Um,
Or pushing each other, I should say.
yeah, I would say that it's definitely been helpful to really think more deeply about that. About, I don't know, I want to say, first of all, just like really stepping back and thinking about where people are.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that interest convergence has come up a lot in terms of like how there is something in it for the audience you're speaking to. It's just a matter of figuring out what that is. But I was also going to say that like this is an English class, and this is like basic rhetoric 101 of like how do you
Mm-hmm.
persuade an audience to do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that rhetorical situation that you need to think about in terms of how to be most effective? And it really, if you even bring it back to that basic level of how you talk to people and what is actually
Yeah.
effective in persuasion, it lines up with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shout out to the English teachers. Y'all didn't know this, but you're actually teaching people to be organizers and upstanders for equity. So, so use those skills. Absolutely. And one thing that Mary and I have talked to each other about as we think about approaching folks as good coaches is like whenever we have a difficult encounter, let's say at a staff meeting or somebody who's anti-equity, we need to practice visualizing the learning pit. We need to practice visualizing that they are somebody who we want to bring into the pit to learn with us about, learn something new with. So how do we persuade them to go into the pit when they're resisting? And then how can we, with a collaborative approach, empower them and work with them to help them get themselves out of the learning pit. Having Learning how to do that when people disagree with you and say things that you find to be offensive and reprehensible is so difficult. And yet, we think it is one of the most important things that you can do to be an upstander for equity. And I know there's people in who are listening to this might say, "Well, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility," or what have you. I'll say, all right, bet that's your perspective. But if we want this movement for equity in schools to be successful, it will not be successful if we don't grow our numbers of people who support it. In every situation that exists in public schools and higher ed right now with DEI work being shut down should remind us that we can't rely on people in positions of power alone, because those people can change with different agendas, different expectations, different beliefs about how resources should be distributed. So if we rest solely on the popularity amongst people with power at a particular time, we allow equity work to be a part of this ping pong where one day it's here and one day it's the next, and we're just hoping and praying that the right people will always be in positions, as opposed to preparing to grow our base, grow our numbers, so that we have the power and we have the resources to sustain the efforts we're doing, even if a certain position goes away or a certain person goes away. That's when you know that you've actually made some significant progress organizing as a campaign. And then the last one is find your people and use the equity dilemma protocol. So Ms. Callahan, when she was with you all with the class recently, she mentioned find your people. And I totally agree that if you are going to be an upstander for equity, you cannot use individualist approaches to address systemic issues. We say equity issues, we say education has systemic issues, has structural issues. And if we go about it trying to solve systemic issues with individual solutions, then we're like the person who thinks that they're solving climate change by switching from a plastic bag to a paper bag. Systemic issues require collective remedies, collective action. But it's one thing to say, find your people and like, we're going to do something about it. What Ms. Callahan and I, what we spend a lot of time and energy into is figuring out how can you provide people the experience of being in a team that not only is on the same page, but is actually getting things done in the most efficient way possible. And to our knowledge, we've been looking, we haven't found any books or articles that says equity teams, equity committees, equity task forces are actually one of the most important levers for equity. But here's how you make sure that that team has a protocol in order to go from being unsuccessful or not making a difference to being successful and making a difference. And I'll add, new teachers, old teachers, we all sort of know that we need protocols to facilitate learning. Even if we're uncomfortable with using protocols, we can all agree that protocols can help facilitate learning. If we know that's true in our classrooms with young learners, why would it not be true for being a part of a team or a group of people who are adult learners? Protocols help facilitate learning amongst kids. It also helps facilitate learning amongst adults. So the question is, what does that protocol look like? We're going to share, we're not going to go through significant details with all of these things because we're trying to keep the video short. But the 6 stages of the protocol that I'm going to share with you all, and I'm going to have it make sure that it's in your emails too, is there's 6 stages. And I should give credit to Ms. Callahan because part of where these 6 stages come from is watching and observing folks like Mrs. Callahan be amazing facilitators of teams. So the first stage is orientation, assembling people for an orientation. Like Ms. Callahan said, find your people, but you got to find your people who also want to go from just talking the talk to walking the walk and say, let's actually just get together, maybe 4 or 5 people. Let's get together and just establish a team that's trying to figure out how can we be better upstanders for equity. The second stage is that once you have that team, you need to solidify what is a dilemma, what is a situation where it is difficult for somebody to act on their core values for equity. What's a barrier to pursuing equity that exists in the school or in the organization? And with your team of people, make a persuasive and compelling case to a school improvement team or executive decision-making group that that dilemma exists, that barrier exists, and your team wants to work on developing recommendations about how to remove that barrier. The third stage is that once that group of people say, yes, you can give us recommendations, then you study the heck out of the problem. Don't rush to studying the solution and trying to resolve the dissonance. Study the problem so that you have a robust and legit sense of why the dilemma is hard to address. Some dilemmas seem easily resolvable until you get into the thick of why is it so hard for people to navigate that dilemma. Then you do some research on what are the potential ideas for how to resolve this dilemma that exists when you talk to teachers, talk to students, look at the research, the scholarship, etc. Fifth stage, you have a ton of ideas about how to resolve the dilemma. You as a group need to reduce that list of recommendations from 10, 15, 20 to 2 or 3 really good recommendations that are feasible and ones that you think that are persuasive, that you can make a persuasive case to that executive decision making group like a school improvement team. And then the last stage is you need to then use your resources, use your skills, use your culture responsive teaching skills, use your organizing skills to persuade, to go back to that school improvement team or executive decision making group, to go back to them and persuade them to see why that issue or why that dilemma exists, see how they can promote the recommendations, and see how they can implement those recommendations. So you are the consultants who promise to come back with answers about how to resolve a dilemma. You come back to that group and you use the skills that you have to persuade them to not only understand it, but to actually promote and implement those recommendations. If your team of pro equity folks uses this protocol, then they will go from being an ineffective people or just a session, a group therapy session of how hard it is, to actually being a group of people who can make progress towards equity. So in the slides after this, you'll see some probing questions and you'll see some information that, and I'll share the slides with you. So if you just click after that, you'll see those steps. But Mrs. Callahan and I have been working with 3 equity teams that have used this protocol, and I think it's fair to say that the sense of we're doing something that's worth something, and the sense of like we are being effective upstanders for equity, that has gone up by virtue of using this protocol. Any thoughts and final thoughts on that, Mrs. Callahan, before we shut it down?
Yeah, just that I think when I was there, I was expressing my excitement over this protocol because it is such a breakthrough in how we do equity work in education or really in any organization. I want to go back to thinking about you all as an audience in that you're not going to be able to walk into a building and say, "Hey, this is what you guys should do." That won't go well.
Nope.
but but in many senses, I think that we also can, and within ourselves, like live this, right? So
Mhm.
I think about if I even have a personal problem, or if my problem is I need to figure out how to even bring this, how would this even end up in the building I end up in? I'm going to start with like, that's a problem because I can't do that, right? As a
Mhm.
new person. But I would dig right into problem inspection and I would
Mhm.
spend a lot of time there in that as you're learning the culture and climate and the people of any building that you're in. That's going to build all the foundation for whenever you're ready to think about, well, okay, now that I understand this, what do I do next? And kind of thinking about making the connections to people who could help support bringing something in like this. So it's starting at the beginning. We're doing a lot of trying to figure out what's going on, and not just on that larger scale of the building, but like within our own classrooms. So
Yeah.
I think the last piece of advice I would just leave with is how important it is to continue to just practice becoming a better culturally responsive educator, and doing that initial, like that's where you're at, right? When you're starting, it's just like doing that problem or doing that investigative and that being curious. And that goes very far too, because you'll learn about people and you'll learn how to best interact with people. Um, so that's my sort of my last little piece.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's almost like coach responsive teaching. Learning to be a coach responsive teacher is like level one. Then learning how to organize, even just like as an individual at first, like building your skills to organize and using mindfulness to build your skills to organize effectively. That's level two. And then level three is that once you have those things set, then you can even be a facilitator of a team with this type of protocol. And if you rush to try to say this team needs to use this protocol and you don't even understand what problems exist, if you don't even know what dilemmas people are struggling with in that building, and you just rush to the solution, then you're going to sound like the know-it-all. You're going to sound like the hall monitor, and folks are not going to, they don't even know you, and they don't know that you care. And so if I don't know you, I don't know that you care about me or why you even care about talking to me, then I'm probably not going to listen intently to what you got to say, or intensively to what you got to say. Similarly, um, building those, using the time to build those skills, and then whenever it's appropriate to advocate for a team to be established with this protocol, just take the time. These issues ain't going away anytime soon, and we would much rather you do it or approach these issues with high quality methods, because unfortunately, when we try to rush to address these issues in ways that are popular or ways that make us feel comfortable alone, then we can actually end up doing more harm than good. And above anything, what we care about is harm reduction, because that's essentially what good equity work can accomplish. And so we hope that we have shared some of this old people's wisdom or knowledge and things that we're still working on, and hope that it would be helpful for you too. And we are here to be thought partners, and to be your support, and one day maybe even be your coaches. I'm putting that out there. I would love to be an equity coach, have an equity coaching business with Mary, with Miss Callahan, where we're coaching people on how to be coach responsive teachers, how to be organizers, and then how to use this protocol. If one day we get to be able to do that for you all for a fee, because we don't believe in exploitation. If we're able to do that for districts across this region one day, or even just in the district that we work in, then we do believe, we feel passionately that we would see some barriers removed if those components were being addressed. So thank you all so much to for listening to us. Thank you for listening to my pitch to Mrs. Callahan to start a business with me one day. And we just hope that the rest of your summer and wherever you end up starting your jobs in the near future, that it's filled with blessings and lessons. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stop recording.